So Dennis, thanks for taking the time and talking to me about weight class sports. And maybe a place to start is I know that in school you wrestled, and so that's a weight class sport. Do you remember making weight and all that went along with that?
Yeah, so my freshman and sophomore year, I wrestled and I had to drop in weight.
Like how much did you have to drop? What were you dropping?
So typically it was like 6 or 8 pounds at a given time. So I wrestled 151 in freshman year, and then I wrestled 171 my sophomore year. And then I took a year off junior year, and I wrestled 189 my senior year.
Wow.
So the freshman and sophomore year, I had to cut down in weight. And that was pretty tough because you have to basically either skip meals or you have to like sort of ration your food. And then on top of that, you also have to find out ways to sort of cheat and cut down like the extra 2 or 3 pounds.
Like what are some cheating ways?
So typically, I mean, it's pretty gross, but like you would get like a water bottle and Starbursts, and you would just like spit in the bottle continuously and not have any water. So it was just like a way to like trick your body into hydration. And then
the Starburst make you salivate, and then you're continuing to just spit that out to reduce your weight. How much could you get off with the Starburst cheat?
About less than half a pound.
But that counts.
Yeah.
Half a pound's half a pound.
Yeah, so like I think a bottle, like a full Gatorade bottle is about a pound, like one of the big ones.
Could you fill that or half fill one of those?
Yeah.
But you can't, but then you're taking the Starburst, aren't you?
You're taking a little bit of that, I think, but I think
not a lot.
Yeah,
you're not swallowing it.
No, you're not swallowing.
Not swallowing.
Yeah,
you're chewing it to salivate and then spitting it back out.
So
okay, what else do you do?
So that another thing was right before weigh-ins, we would put on like these sauna suits, or just like put in a ton of layers of clothes, and just like do the stationary bike for like in some cases it had to be like a couple hours. Right before weigh-ins, you couldn't eat. You wake up hungry. And you just try to make the weight. And so you just like on the bike, you're sweating, you take everything off, you weigh yourself, you see where you are, and then if you haven't lost enough, then you do it again.
Like a piece of luggage, you get under 50 pounds, and you gotta pull something out, you gotta pull something out.
Yeah.
Okay, so wow, that is tough. And what other cheats? Any other cheats?
Trying to remember. I mean, like exercising fasted. I think was a big one. But I think all of these, especially when you're talking about expending energy and you don't have any resources, it gets dangerous because you're like exhausted, like your body's.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because you're denying yourself nutrition, and then you're specifically dehydrating yourself, and then you're ramping up the exercise, right? Both to lose weight and to in the sport itself.
Yeah, exactly. So it's some people argue that you're losing all this weight. You're basically robbing your muscles of all these resources that could make you at peak performance. But because you're removing those resources, you're really reducing your performance to make the weight so that you're like at the top of that weight class. As opposed to being like a 157 and having to move up in weight, which is a lot harder actually in some cases.
To move up than down?
Yeah. Well, it depends. So if you're... And wrestling is also like very skill based. So you could be someone who's 10 pounds smaller than somebody else if you're really, really technically good at wrestling.
Sure.
But if they're technically good and they have the physical like ability over you, then you're going to lose in most cases.
So there's something perverse about the trying to, in terms of moving down, trying to make weight. You may be winning the battle but losing the war. You may be succeeding in getting into the weight class, but not at your maximum performance or capacity. That if you've gone up and allowed yourself to nourish yourself maximally, you might actually be better off.
Yeah. So I think looking at it in retrospect, I probably did more psychologically better my senior year than I did my freshman and sophomore year.
When you were going up?
When I was going up.
Yeah. Okay. In what way? When you say psychologically better?
Because it's like you're focusing more on like your building your strength. You're focusing more on building your wrestling ability, and you're focusing less on like what did I eat, how much of it did I have, I really need to make weight. It's just an extra stressor to an already kind of pretty stressful sport.
Yeah. A very stressful sport. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was also like the caveat to that is it's also very intimidating to be. So I was at 176 my senior year, and I couldn't drop down to 171 because my body fat was too low.
Okay.
So the trainer like didn't allow it. So she said I had to wrestle up to 189.
Wow.
Which like I had to go from 176 to 189 consistently, and
what?
High metabolism, like you can't really like I was eating as much as I could to try to make weight above to peak out at 189, but I'd usually get up to like 181, 182. And these people who are coming down from 200 in some cases, if they're really good at losing weight, they look massive to me. Like,
right, sure.
I'm like, how am I going to beat this guy?
You're doing your best like a blowfish to just puff up a little bit.
Yeah.
And they're cutting 10, 15 pounds, and they're like monsters, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, but I think I still did better than I expected wrestling people that I thought I was going to lose against just because of that physical intimidation.
Okay.
And it could just be because those people are fatigued. Like they might do a lot better at 215.
Right.
Or 205.
Well, it's a real balance, isn't it? That's a real balance. And you mentioned, as you were talking about that, when in the junior years when you were wrestling, you talked about what you would be. You'd be fasting. You'd be thinking about food. Mm-hmm. You'd be wondering, did I eat too much?
Yeah.
Should I have stopped more?
Yeah.
It almost seems like somebody who's like yo-yo dieting or something.
Yeah.
It's like food becomes a big part of your life.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of drives your life.
It drives your life, yeah.
Yeah. So like you're thinking about that, and then on top of that, you also have to think about school and
life.
Yeah, life.
There's dating. There's a social life. There's school. What about anything else that people would do that you saw with your other teammates and stuff to reduce weight? You'd see anything like, did people ever purge, or they ever do any laxatives or diuretics or
that I don't know
extreme measures?
That I don't know, probably because it's more sort of like not. If they're going to do it, they'd probably do it secretively.
Privately, yeah.
But I'm sure that there was. I mean, there was people who were really stressed out they couldn't make weight, and then if they couldn't, also the coach would like get mad.
Yeah.
So it's like if you're like a really small guy, mm-hmm. I think our 95 pounder was like a 4-time state champ.
Wow.
I just remember how miserable he was. Every week we'd have a meet. He was just like miserable.
Successful, but miserable.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, I think he went on to wrestle for Brown University.
Wow.
So he was really good, and his 2 other brothers were also state champs.
Wow.
So it was very like wrestling oriented family.
Right. Well, there's a lot of pressure in that then too, isn't there?
And it's one of those things that starts from childhood usually with wrestling. So like usually the people that do really well are the ones that are really learning the technique, which I think helps.
Sure, it's huge.
Yeah.
It's a strategic sport for sure. Yeah. Definitely.
But yeah. So I remember my senior year I'd sit with the wrestling kids and they would eat like a couple of fries. And I'd have like 3 meals on my plate.
They were trying to go down and you were trying to go up, is that it?
Yeah, so
you were gloating, weren't you?
Yeah. Are you gonna eat that?
Pass it over here.
Yeah.
Hey, tell me, Dennis, about pull back the curtain and tell me about the sort of the psychology of wrestling. I mean, you mentioned how much food and your caloric intake and all becomes part of your life. What kinds of thoughts and what kinds of emotions go with the season as you're concentrating on your weight and trying to make sure you qualify and all of that?
I mean, I think a lot of the time it's just pressure. It's like you're having to sort of like justify what you're doing because you're creating a justification or a reason for why you're doing what you're doing, even though you kind of know it's not healthy. And I think that people probably get into like this cycle where it seems normal, but it's not, like if you look at it outside the box.
So trying to normalize the normal.
I think so.
Normalize the abnormal.
I think that like with nutrition, I think that happens a lot because like with food, especially the way that it's viewed in our like collective society, I feel like it's one of those things that like people sort of judge like externally, but also internally.
Mm.
So like you judge yourself. You're like, oh, why did I have that? Or like, I should think about like preventing myself from having this. Or,
And when you look back on it now, Dennis, I mean, you've got the advantage of some perspective and some years, and you look at that wrestling sort of period of your life. When you look from the position now, I mean, obviously you're in great shape. You pay attention to your health and your welfare, and you look back on what that era was like. Did that seem to you to have been healthy or unhealthy, or are there things you would do differently looking back?
It's kind of hard to like, I mean, I definitely would do it differently. I think it's from a nutrition and a health perspective, especially for children who are developing. I think it's really important to stress like growing and developing and maximizing that, as opposed to like focusing on like, you should be at this, especially kids, because kids' bodies are consistently changing. So like, you might not make weight, but that might also be because you grew like half an inch. Like,
right,
so like,
exactly.
You shouldn't really have that pressure. But I think if the trainers are good enough, they'll kind of recognize that. But I'm sure that there are areas where they don't have that sort of insight. So maybe they sort of like beat it into the kids a little bit, that they should feel bad about not making weight, or. But I think it's also like it's not very productive for your body and your development to, again, like rob your resources when you're having to use those resources to do so many other things than just wrestling.
Yeah.
And developing.
I can see the competing kind of tensions.
Yeah.
That you want to have the performance, you want to have the achievement, you got to make weight to do it. You're still interested in people's best, welfare, but trying to balance all those factors out is tough.
Yeah. So if I was a coach, like a wrestling coach, I would probably make sure that people knew like to sort of prioritize their health and the skill and the ability to get strength over being slightly heavier than the strength that you lose being lighter. I guess it's probably case by case. If somebody has 20% body fat and they're marginally moving down a weight class, I'd probably be less concerned, but I'd probably also want to educate that kid or that person that, there are other healthier ways to lose that weight than going to like the purging tactics that
or even the starburst. It's probably not. So it's really helpful, and I appreciate you talking to me, because in some ways you're like a one-man case study. You spent years going down in weight, you spent time going up in weight, and you've seen the whole spectrum and the good and the bad and the ugly that accompanies that.
But I think that it also affected it wasn't just for wrestling necessarily. It was for also like, I'm sure that wrestlers who cut down probably also think about the benefits of looking good, right? So like, oh, I'm cutting down, but I'm also losing weight. I'm cut. Like you can see more muscle definition. So sometimes people will carry that on to like their lives. I think that that's among the other sources of eating disorders and maybe not necessarily having a great relationship with food is probably that. Like that's one contribution. The other contributions are like your social pressures. You have to look a certain way, like the type of media that you get, food, how you view food, and like calories, and and then the education, like what type of relationship you have with food. All of those are factors.
And they're factors, I think, for everyone, right? And then you get in something like a weight class sport, and suddenly they're written neon, right? So there are all those issues, but now they're put in bold, and your success is contingent on them, and that makes it difficult. All right, well, that's a great place for us to stop. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with you about weight class sports and your experience. Appreciate it.